One night in Los Angeles, a woman was found lying in a dark alley. She had been shot. Blood covered the pavement beneath her, and for a moment it seemed like she was already dead. But somehow, she was still breathing. When police arrived, she managed to whisper something terrifying. The man who shot her had picked her up like it was nothing. He spoke calmly. He acted normal. There was no panic in his voice, no anger, no hesitation. And then, suddenly, he pulled out a gun and shot her before driving away into the night. What she didn't know was that she had just survived a man who had already been killing for years. A man who would later become known as the Grim Sleeper. Because for a long time it seemed like he had stopped killing, until investigators realized something horrifying. He hadn't stopped. He had simply been waiting. And by the time police finally understood what was happening, at least 10 women were already dead. What made this case even more disturbing was that the killer didn't hide in the shadows. He lived a completely normal life. He had neighbors who greeted him, friends who trusted him, family members who had no idea what he was capable of. To everyone around him, he seemed like just another man living in Los Angeles. But hidden inside his home, investigators would later discover something that shocked even experienced detectives. Hundreds of photographs, pictures of women, many of them unidentified, many of them possibly victims. For more than 20 years, this man walked freely through the streets of Los Angeles, hunting, watching, waiting for the right moment. Tonight, we're diving into the disturbing case of Lonnie Franklin Jr., the serial killer who managed to hide in plain sight for decades, and the tiny piece of DNA that finally exposed him. To understand how this killer managed to stay hidden for so long, we have to go back to Los Angeles in the 1980s. At the time, South Central Los Angeles was going through a difficult period. Crime rates were rising, drug addiction was spreading through many neighborhoods, and vulnerable people often slipped through the cracks of society. Many disappearances were barely investigated. Many victims were forgotten quickly. And this environment created the perfect conditions for a predator to operate without being noticed. In 1985, a young woman named Deborah Jackson was found dead. Her body had been dumped in an alley. She had been shot. At first, investigators treated it as another tragic but isolated case. There were few witnesses, almost no evidence, and very little media attention. Slowly, the case faded into the background like so many others. But what detectives didn't realize at the time was that Deborah Jackson was only the first known victim of something far more terrifying. Over the next few years, more women began to appear. Their bodies were discovered in dumpsters, abandoned streets, and empty lots. Most of them were young. Many struggled with addiction. Some worked as sex workers. Because of this, their disappearances didn't always receive the attention they deserved. But detectives eventually noticed a disturbing pattern. Many of the victims had been shot in a similar way. DNA evidence collected from several crime scenes suggested something chilling. The same man was responsible. A serial killer was hunting women in Los Angeles, and then, just as suddenly as the murders had begun, they stopped. For 14 years, there were no new victims connected to the same killer. Investigators began to believe the murderer had died, moved away, or been arrested for another crime. The case slowly grew colder and colder. Eventually, many detectives assumed the killer would never be identified, but the truth was far more disturbing. The killer had never left. He was still living in Los Angeles, still going to work, still talking to neighbors, still blending perfectly into society. For years, he simply waited. Then, in 2002, something terrifying happened. The murders started again. In 2002, a young woman named Princess Cheyenne Berthomieu was found dead in Los Angeles. Just like the earlier victims, she had been shot and her body had been left in a public place. At first, investigators treated it as another isolated homicide. But as forensic evidence was analyzed, something shocking emerged. The DNA collected from the crime scene matched evidence from murders that had happened nearly 20 years earlier. Detectives realized something chilling. The killer from the 1980s had returned. Or perhaps he had never really stopped. As the investigation reopened, detectives began looking back at old case files that had been forgotten for years. Slowly, they started connecting the dots. The same weapon pattern, the same victim profile, the same locations across south-central Los Angeles. Most of the victims were women who lived vulnerable lives. Many struggled with addiction. Some were involved in sex work. This made them easy targets for a predator who knew exactly how to approach them without raising suspicion. Then investigators uncovered something that made the case even darker. One of the victims had actually survived. Years earlier, a woman named Enyitra Washington had accepted a ride from a man who seemed polite and friendly. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The man drove calmly through the streets of Los Angeles, making casual conversation. But suddenly, without warning, he pulled out a gun and shot her in the chest. Washington later described the moment as completely shocking. There had been no argument, no warning signs, nothing that suggested what was about to happen. The man simply shot her and continued driving. Miraculously, she survived the attack. After shooting her, the man sexually assaulted her and then pushed her out of the car onto the street, believing she would die from the wound. But she didn't. And her testimony would later become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. She described the man as calm, almost emotionless, as if what he had done meant nothing to him. Detectives began to realize they were not dealing with someone who killed in moments of rage. This was someone who hunted deliberately, someone who planned his attacks carefully. As investigators dug deeper into the case, they also realized something deeply troubling. Many of these murders had received little media attention when they first happened. Because the victims were vulnerable women, their deaths had not always been treated with urgency. This meant the killer had been able to operate for years without facing the intense pressure that often accompanies serial murder investigations. For decades, he had simply blended into the background of the city. Then, in 2008, detectives created a task force specifically focused on solving the murders connected to what they now called the Grim Sleeper. The name came from the mysterious 14-year gap between the early murders and the later ones. Investigators began using new forensic technology that hadn't existed in the 1980s. DNA databases had grown much larger, and new methods allowed detectives to compare genetic evidence across families. But the breakthrough came in a completely unexpected way. Investigators began looking at relatives of potential suspects whose DNA might partially match the evidence collected from the crime scenes. Eventually, one particular name appeared during the investigation, a man whose DNA suggested he might be related to the killer. Detectives started quietly looking into his family. That's when they discovered his father, a man named Lonnie Franklin Jr. Franklin lived in South Los Angeles and had spent most of his life working as a mechanic and sanitation worker. To neighbors, he seemed like an ordinary man. Some even described him as friendly. Nothing about him immediately suggested the dark secret investigators suspected he might be hiding, but detectives needed proof, so they began watching him. For weeks, investigators followed Franklin's movements, waiting for the opportunity to collect something that contained his DNA. Eventually, their chance came when Franklin visited a pizza restaurant. After finishing his meal, he threw away a slice of pizza in the trash. Detectives recovered it. The DNA taken from that pizza crust would change everything. When forensic analysts compared it to the evidence from the murders, the results were unmistakable. It was a match. After more than 2 decades of killings, investigators had finally identified the Grim Sleeper. In July of 2010, police surrounded Franklin's home and arrested him. But what detectives discovered inside the house was almost as disturbing as the murders themselves. During the search, investigators found hundreds of photographs of women. Many appeared to be unconscious. Others seemed unaware they were being photographed. Some of the women in the images have never been identified to this day. Detectives believe some of them may have been victims who were never discovered. In court, prosecutors presented evidence linking Franklin to at least 10 murders and 1 attempted murder. The testimony of survivor Enietra Washington became one of the most powerful moments of the trial.
By my count, this is 13. 13. Wow.
My name is Mitra Marquette, and I'm one of your living victims. This is not a really easy thing. I've been praying all morning about it. I really think you are truly a piece of evil. You're right up there with Manson. The hurting part about it is that you did it to your own. You put my life in fear of people I should be proud of. I have fear of a man that's supposed to take care of me, protect me. You took that away. You make me look at people differently. And I shouldn't. I'm supposed to be kind to everyone, and I ask the Lord, I want to do the right thing. I can't forgive you because I never expected what was done to me. It was done out of animosity. Because it has to be hate for women, your own kind. And the respect that you have a daughter, you have a granddaughter, that you don't care that someone can come behind and do the same to them. That shows the type of person that you really are, that you're full of evil. You're a Satan representative. Your defense shows that. You guys are all in line. Call it what it is. It's right there. It's visible. You sat here with no remorse as to what you've done to even give, for us to give you forgiveness. Any type of respect that you had just for being a person, you didn't show. And they say you only give respect to those that earn it. You certainly have not earned it. I do respect the team and prosecutors that have been here for us. I appreciate the fact that after all of this, that the police did do their part. Long time coming, but you did it. I thank the jury that you saw enough in us to protect us from one less person out there trying to destroy us. I really am so hurt by this whole thing because I don't have no closure. Because I'm still living. It's a good thing. I'm going to pray to God. I thank Him every day for it. But how can you live in a world that you have fear of? How can you just go places? I try. But how am I going to see another you? Because I did have discernment that day I met you when I said no. But because you blackmailed me being a black woman, knowing that I'm supposed to give you respect and you took it away. So how am I supposed to give that to someone else? So now you got to ask yourself, how's your family supposed to give it to you?
She faced the man who had tried to kill her decades earlier and helped bring the truth to light. In 2016, Lonnie Franklin Jr. was found guilty of multiple counts of murder. The court sentenced him to death. For the families of the victims, the verdict finally brought some sense of justice after decades of unanswered questions. But even today, many investigators believe the true number of victims may never be known. Because hidden among those hundreds of photographs, there may still be faces of women whose stories were never told, and the full darkness behind the grim sleeper may never be completely uncovered.